are a lot of really good pitchers used in Diamond Dynasty right now. So today, I'm going to go through and tier list all of them to help you decide which 5 you should be using right now. I do want to quickly say sorry for not posting much here last week. I've been putting a lot of work in on my main channel videos. It's getting a lot of momentum, so I'm trying to focus on that. We're going to get back into the rhythm of it, starting off with this starting pitcher tier list. And the big thing here is I'm judging a lot on attributes and the things on paper. If there's a pitcher you pitch well with, always use that pitcher. These are the only pitchers based on their pitch mix and their attributes that they have that I wouldn't bother using much of because they're a lot more difficult to pitch with. For example, Zach Greinke throws very slow and doesn't have great attributes. Clayton Kershaw has a very weird pitch mix to pitch well with. Now we slide up to the D tier. And on the D tier of this tier list, you're gonna see a few pitchers that I think have better pitch mixes or enough attributes where you probably have a chance of pitching well with them on those higher difficulties. But again, if they're gonna be in your rotation, they're gonna be one of your last couple pitchers. For example, Adam Wainwright has that sinker cutter changeup mix. The thing that keeps him from being a little higher is not having something like a slider. Sliders are so good to have. And a sweeping curve, I find a little tougher to use as a pitch, but this could be a nice pitcher for some control if you want to dot pitches, but of course, there are better pitchers that do this. The only 90 overalls I've considered are the Negro League pitchers, Martin Higo being one of them. And I will say, on their own, without any boost, the attributes really aren't great. But to be honest, I'm going to put them in this D tier because I do think most people end up using them with the boost on. And I think someone like Higo has some nasty stuff on the mound, which could be somewhat effective at least, despite those attributes being absolutely dookie. And then we have some 95 overalls like Catfish Hunter. And you look at the attributes and they really aren't bad. It looks like he should be a C, B, A tier pitcher based on the attributes. But the thing is, his pitch mix is just a little basic. It doesn't throw too hard. There's not much velocity there. And the pitch mix isn't going to be that great. We're going to deceive a lot of people. And I think that kind of is a fair case for the D tier. You could use them if you pitch well with them, but I would not be using them much unless for some reason you happen to be doing well with them. Once you start getting to those higher difficulties, I would not be using them. I'd be prioritizing C, B, and A tier pitchers. On to our C tier pitchers. There are a couple captains that need to be talked about because I think they're stuff plays or they have something about them that makes them better than the others. For example, Chris Sale does have a little bit of a basic pitch mix, but the motion is what makes him really good, despite the slightly lower hits per nine than some of the other pitchers in the game right now. This could be a very solid 4 or 5 starter for your rotation, but again, I don't know if everyone's going to be doing as such. Nolan Ryan is great on the velocity. For players that just struggle against velocity, which a fair amount of people do, he becomes very effective because he's going to be very tough to catch up to. Obviously, his big weakness is the lack of control. He will occasionally hang a pitch. And finally, we have a couple charisma pitchers here, Joe Ryan and Tristan McKenzie. I know it's weird to see a 97 overall in this bunch, but the attributes are the only thing they have going for them. And I will say I've heard some good on McKenzie. I don't think there's enough there, especially in the pitch mix, to really do well. 2 fastballs that are virtually the same. Very tough to pitch effectively with a pitcher like this. Good players in Hall of Fame will hit them well. So to summarize the C tier here, these pitchers can have some effectiveness and are probably more likely to be your 5 starters in your rotation. I think most teams will probably have B tier pitchers in their 4 or 5 slot while targeting ace level pitchers in those 1, 2, 3 spots in the A and S tiers. As you see in the B tier, these pitchers have a little bit more velocity paired with good enough attributes or have that sinker cutter mix that are very favorable to people, but with a little bit more on the attributes. Starting off with charisma, Marcus Stroman. The pitch mix isn't that far off from, say, Corbin Burns, but nice little underrated charisma pitcher of the bunch from what I've used so far. I have live series Jacob deGrom in here because as a live series, gets an outlier on the 4-seam, pair that with a good inside edge day, and he's going to be a very effective pitcher on that higher difficulty. And finally, we have Kodai Senga, one of the other pitchers in this bunch. I've heard his forkball is great. This card has been really tough to hit for some people, I've heard. So I'm going to go with the benefit of the doubt from what I've heard. So yeah, once we get to the B tier, we start to sprinkle into outlier, looking for those 4-seam fastballs with some really good velocity, also paired with enough attributes. In my opinion, this will really be the 4 or 5 pitchers for most teams, especially once you're really getting going into the game. You start to get a lot of team affinity done. You'll be targeting these cards for your rotation, I think. Next, we have the A tier. And the thing with the A tier is that these will end up being aces for some people, but there's something that keeps them from being a top pitcher in the game. If you're someone who has hundreds of thousands of stubs, you might not be targeting these A tier guys as much if you're trying to build the best team of the best teams. Starting off with 99 Adam Wainwright. For the same reason we mentioned Wainwright before, he is a nice control pitcher, high walks per 9, slow velocity, he is gonna die. Lack of a slider is, I think, his big problem. Some people are gonna struggle not having a slider, but at least with this version of Wainwright, more on the attributes to really be effective as an ace level pitcher, where you could actually use him at that level of the game. I've got 99 Brandon Webb, and as a 99 overall, he's not the biggest target. His hits per 9 is a little weaker, and I feel like Fergie Jenkins fits into this mold as well, but might just be missing that one pitch or just a little bit of the juice and the attributes to really be an ace level pitcher. So as you are starting to build teams, you'll probably have a couple guys in your rotation that are these diamond duos or some really good charisma cards that you really like that could be used. Like, I personally like Brandon Webb because I like sinker cutter and a really slow changeup. It's not for everyone though, and I don't know if he's like an ace for most teams. So in general, with this A tier, some of the cards like Dustin May and Luis Castillo have some velocity and can be very effective, and some of them will play to that top level pitcher, but there's just something missing. Like Vita Blue doesn't have a sinker or a cutter. Dontrelle Willis is a fun card but lacks a little bit of the attributes. I think that goes for all of these guys in the A tier are very good 1, 2, 3 pitcher options to use, especially as you're trying to build a god squad. And then finally the S tier, but all of these guys have good enough attributes, a well-rounded pitch mix, velocity that I think plays well, and I think these bunch of players could be ace level pitchers from what I've used and seen. Remember, I'm judging based on attributes. I think the A and S tier are really the best pitchers in the game. I want to talk about Bob Gibson because I do think he's a very effective pitcher. His only downside is that so many people face him right now. Very obtainable ace level pitcher, great in the hits per 9, outlier in the 4-seam paired with a sinker. I do think he's still one of the most effective pitchers in the game. I think Yu Darvish is this level of pitcher from what I've used so far. He has that sinker, cutter, splitter, slider mix, which is a very good pitch mix. He's got pretty good control on the cutter, and especially good velocity difference between the cutter and the 4-seam. I think he's better than, say, Brandon Webb and Dustin May and some other pitchers who have sinker cutter. I think Shohei Ohtani is definitely a top pitcher. He might not pitch the best for you based on how you pitch for his cards, but obviously being able to crush the baseball is valuable, and now you can throw him in the DH spot. He's definitely at least an A tier pitcher, but once you include the hitting, I think that's what takes him to another level. You could throw a really good hitter into your lineup at that stub price. I think Pedro Martinez along with Grayson Rodriguez are somewhat similar pitchers, 4-seam cutter slider mix. I will say Pedro is sometimes one of those pitchers that people struggle to pitch with because while he has the stuff and this card is gross on the attributes, something about his release point is a little bit different than other pitchers. So I think Pedro could be very effective, especially if you don't throw the 4-seam too often. Some people are going to struggle pitching with a pitcher like this, so he might not be an S tier level pitcher for everyone. He might be an A level, and I think Grayson Rodriguez is a similar way, except Grayson has a little bit of a funkier motion this year, which I really like. And then finally, I think if there's one pitcher who I'd really recommend targeting for a number 1, it's Roki Sasaki. He has the mix of velocity, getting outlier on the sinker and the 4-seam. I know not everyone loves outlier on a sinker, but you pair that with the speed of his cutter and a good forkball and slider, I've heard this card is nuts. He seems like the number 1, along with maybe Pedro or Grayson or Bob Gibson if you really like them. Again, it just comes down to the type of pitch mix you like. This is definitely more of the velocity first type pitcher. And yeah, that is the tier list. Pitching is tough. We underestimate the overall pitch mixes and the things that people personally like. I love my sinker cutter pitchers with very slow changeups. I want to be able to change speeds. I don't always need velocity to pitch well. On the other hand, some people feel like they need velocity if they like relying on outlier fastballs. Whatever way you pitch, it really comes down to the type of pitcher that you like. So I recommend building a rotation of 5 pitchers who are all somewhat similar or at least complement the way that you play. So let me know in the comments what type of pitchers you've enjoyed the most and how you feel about this list. I appreciate you all hanging out with me today. We'll be back with the post here this week. Do a reliever tier list to wrap up these tier lists for now. We'll start doing some fun tips about hitting tips or just content tips, and that will be the show. So make sure you sub for those things. I'll see you again on the next one.